The morning mist rolled low across the dense pine forest as Ethan whistled for his golden retriever, Max. They had walked this trail countless times before, yet something about today felt wrong. The silence was heavier, the birds absent, and Max's nose twitched nervously as if sensing something unseen. Ethan adjusted his jacket, thinking maybe it was just the weather, but the air itself carried a strange metallic scent. Max darted off suddenly, barking frantically toward a thicket of overgrown shrubs. Ethan called after him, but the dog ignored every command, driven by a force that made the forest seem alive with whispers. When Ethan finally caught up, Max was pawing at the soil, whimpering and growling at the same time. The ground was uneven, disturbed, as though something buried there had been clawing its way out. Ethan bent down to pull Max back, but then he saw it. A white curve protruding from the dirt, smooth but not quite bone-like. It was larger than any animal skeleton he had ever seen. His fingers trembled as he brushed away the soil. What emerged wasn't just a skull. It was elongated, distorted, and marked with deep carvings like ancient runes. For a moment, Ethan thought it must be a prank, some Halloween prop discarded by hikers, but when he touched it, the cold surface sent a shock up his arm that made his vision blur. Max backed away, whining in terror. The forest around them seemed to exhale, and for the briefest second, Ethan swore he heard a heartbeat pulsing beneath the earth. He stumbled backward, clutching the strange skull as the wind rose, whispering words that weren't in any language he knew. By evening, the authorities had arrived, tape stretched across the forest floor, flashing lights slicing through the fog. Archaeologists were called in after initial analysis revealed that the skeleton was unlike any known species. Its structure bore resemblance to a human, but the proportions were impossible. Limbs too long, ribs spiraled like a shell, and the skull extended back in an unnatural slope. Ethan watched from behind the barricade, arms crossed, feeling the same unease he had felt in the forest. The scientists spoke in hushed tones, their flashlights dancing over the dirt like ghostly candles. 2 days later, the excavation site was completely sealed. No journalists were allowed in, and the local police avoided eye contact when questioned. Ethan's curiosity turned to fear when Max stopped eating. The dog would sit by the window every night, staring into the dark woods, growling low at something invisible. Sometimes he barked at reflections that weren't there. Sometimes the lights flickered, and Ethan could swear he smelled that same metallic scent, like blood and rust, seeping through the walls. On the third night, he woke to scratching sounds at his door. He assumed it was Max, but the dog was lying rigid at the foot of his bed, ears flat, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The scratching grew louder, deliberate, like nails dragging against wood. When Ethan opened the door, nothing was there, just cold air rushing in from the hallway, and muddy footprints leading toward the forest. Human-shaped, but longer, as if whoever left them had fingers instead of toes. Unable to shake the dread, Ethan drove to the site the next morning. The area was abandoned. No tents, no tools, no sign of the archaeological team. Only the crater remained, surrounded by circles of burnt grass. In the center, a hole gaped open, descending into blackness. He shouted into it, his voice echoing back distorted, as if something down there was repeating him. He left quickly, but as he turned back toward his car, he saw movement at the tree line. Tall shadows shifting against the mist. Back home, his phone rang endlessly that night. Unknown number. When he finally answered, there was silence, then a faint voice whispering, "You shouldn't have unearthed it." He froze, heart pounding. Sleep became impossible. The following nights brought more noises, dragging, thumping, whispering. Sometimes Ethan caught glimpses of figures outside, bent and pale, watching from the shadows. Their eyes gleamed faintly green, like the reflection of a predator's gaze. Max barked furiously one night, lunging at the door, and when Ethan opened it, the forest stood unnaturally still. Then came the smell, stronger, suffocating, and from the darkness a shape moved, tall and thin, its skin stretched like parchment. Ethan's flashlight caught its face, hollow eyes, sharp teeth, and the same rune markings carved into its skull. It tilted its head, almost curiously, before vanishing into the trees. The next morning, Ethan packed his things, desperate to leave the town. But as he drove away, the radio flickered to life on its own. A news bulletin announced that the entire archaeological team had gone missing. The final transmission from their camp contained only one phrase, repeated over and over. "It's not dead." Ethan couldn't shake the words echoing through his mind. It's not dead. As he drove, the road behind him seemed to vanish into mist, the world shrieking to the narrow beam of his headlights. Max whimpered softly on the back seat, eyes fixed on something behind them. Ethan glanced in the rear-view mirror, and for a moment, he saw movement, a figure walking down the center of the road, impossibly far, yet moving too fast. He pressed the accelerator harder. The figure disappeared, but a shadow clung to the car, trailing them like smoke. He stopped at a small motel outside town, the kind that looked forgotten by time. The owner, an old man with clouded eyes, watched him closely as he checked in. When Ethan mentioned the excavation, the man's expression froze. "You should have left it buried," he whispered. "They always come back for what's theirs." Ethan tried to ask what he meant, but the man simply handed him the key and muttered, "If you hear the knocking, don't answer." That night, Ethan barely slept, clutching Max close as footsteps echoed outside his door, soft, deliberate, and getting closer. In the morning, he found muddy footprints leading right up to his window. The prints were identical to the ones he had seen near his house. Long, finger-like impressions that ended abruptly, as if the creature had vanished mid-step. Ethan packed his bags and left without checking out. He needed answers, and there was only one place to get them: the university that had sent the archaeological team. When he arrived, the department was eerily quiet. Desks were overturned, papers scattered, and the walls bore the same strange runic carvings he'd seen on the skull. He searched through the files until he found the lead archaeologist's notebook. The entries grew increasingly unstable toward the end, the handwriting erratic. One note stood out, dated just days before they vanished. "It's a burial. Not of a man, but of something that shouldn't have lived. The locals called it the Watcher Beneath. When we removed the skull, we felt it move. The earth trembled. Something is listening." Ethan's stomach turned cold. Beneath the note was a sketch, the exact creature he had seen at his door. Suddenly, Max began barking furiously, facing the doorway. Ethan spun around. The hallway lights flickered, and the air grew heavy, pressing on his chest. Then he saw them, faint shapes forming from the shadows, silhouettes of the missing archaeologists. Their eyes were empty sockets, and their mouths hung open in silent screams. As they approached, Ethan grabbed Max and ran, the temperature dropping with every step. When he burst into daylight, the campus seemed normal again. No bodies, no shadows, but the notebook in his hand was wet, as if soaked in cold soil. He checked into another motel miles away, but peace never followed. That night, Ethan dreamed of a cavern deep beneath the forest, filled with bones arranged in spirals. In the center lay a colossal skeleton, larger than any human, ribs wrapping around a hollow cavity that pulsed faintly like a beating heart. A whisper filled his head. "You woke me." He jolted awake, drenched in sweat, the same whisper echoing from the walls of the room. The radio beside the bed switched on by itself, broadcasting static, and beneath it, the faint sound of breathing. Desperate, Ethan decided to return to the forest. He needed to end this. The drive felt endless, the sky bruised with storm clouds that refused to move. Ethan could no longer tell if the things he saw were real or the fragments of a mind fraying under fear. The night stretched endlessly, every sound magnified, every shadow alive. The phone lines stayed dead, and the town around him seemed emptier each day. People who had once greeted him now looked away. He overheard whispers that those who went near the forest began hearing voices, seeing faces in the bark of trees. The earth had swallowed the archaeologists, but their discovery had seeped into everyone else, an infection of memory. One evening, the sky burned crimson before sunset. The light spilled through Ethan's window like blood. He sat motionless, staring at the small box he had hidden under his bed, the piece of bone he'd kept without realizing it. Its surface throbbed faintly, like it was breathing. Max whined, refusing to come near. Ethan's pulse raced. He wrapped the bone in a cloth and drove to the forest once more, unable to fight the compulsion pulling him back. The whisper in his head grew louder with every mile. "Come home." When he reached the clearing, it was no longer silent. The trees swayed, though there was no wind, and the soil pulsed under his feet like a heartbeat. He dug at the same spot he had filled before, hands trembling, the whisper becoming a chorus now, thousands of voices calling his name. The ground split open with a hiss of steam, revealing a chasm that smelled of decay and age. From within, faint lights glowed, twisting like fireflies made of bone. Then he saw them. The archaeologists, or what was left of them, their forms, half human, half fossil, kneeling in circles, eyes glowing faintly, they began chanting in unison, their mouths moving in unnatural rhythm. Ethan clutched the bone tighter, realizing it wasn't just a fragment. It was a key. The creature had wanted it back. The runes on the bone lit up, and from below, something massive stirred. The ground shook violently, trees split open, roots curling like tendrils. A hand skeletal yet impossibly large emerged from the pit, reaching toward the sky. The air grew thick, vibrating with a hum that made Ethan's teeth ache. He understood then. The skeleton wasn't buried by men. It had buried itself. Max barked furiously, lunging toward the pit as if trying to protect his owner. The creature below opened its mouth, releasing a low moan that shook the forest. The archaeologists' bodies began to crumble into dust, their souls feeding the rising shape. Ethan felt the bone pulse violently in his hand, demanding release. In a desperate act, he hurled it into the chasm. For an instant, everything froze. Then, a blinding flash and silence. When the light faded, the hole had vanished, replaced by untouched ground. Ethan collapsed, gasping. Max lay beside him, alive but trembling. The dawn crept slowly, painting the trees gold, washing away the night's horrors. For a brief, fragile moment, Ethan believed he had stopped it. He gathered Max and drove home under a sky that finally looked human again. But deep inside, something felt wrong. The air was too still. The radio was silent. The whisper was gone, completely gone, and that frightened him more than its presence ever had. Days passed. The town returned to its uneasy normal. Ethan noticed small things. The grass near his house never grew again. Birds refused to land on his roof, and mirrors continued to flicker with faint reflections of the forest. He avoided looking at them, but one night, exhaustion betrayed him. In the mirror, behind his own reflection, stood the creature, not menacing, just watching, motionless, patient. The runes carved into its skull glowed faintly, and beneath its hollow chest, something pulsed. The bone! He screamed, smashing the mirror, but shards only multiplied the image. Dozens of the same hollow faces staring back at him from every angle. The lights went out. The whisper returned, this time inside his skull, soft and sorrowful. We are awake now. Ethan fell to his knees, clutching his head as the room darkened, the floor vibrating beneath him. Outside, the forest began to glow faintly red, like embers breathing. The earth itself was remembering. When morning came, Ethan and Max were gone. The house stood empty, doors wide open, footprints leading toward the forest. Locals said they saw lights that night, weaving through the trees like will-o'-the-wisps. Days later, hikers found Ethan's car parked at the trail entrance, keys still in the ignition. Inside, years passed and the story faded into rumor. The excavation site became overgrown, swallowed by nature. But every autumn, when the mist rolls low and the wind carries that faint metallic scent, dogs in the nearby towns begin to howl, all at once facing the forest. And if you stand quietly enough, you can still hear a faint heartbeat beneath the ground, steady, patient, waiting for someone curious enough to dig again.